Welcome to Exhumed, an underground retrospective of arts and culture in the late 20th century. I'm James Wallace. In tonight's episode, we are going to look at bands with female members that were part of the British post-punk scene. In tonight's episode, I'm going to go through the bands a little more quickly so I can get as many bands into this episode. Also, you'll notice the absence of Susie Sue and the Banshees. The reason for this is because I covered Susie Sue and the Banshees in episode 1. The roots of the Slits start when German-born Ariane Daniel Foster threw a tantrum at a Patti Smith concert in London. Spanish-born Palmora Romero saw her and decided she would be a great singer. Palmero had been involved in a band called Flowers of Romance, but she was kicked out because she refused the advances of one Sid Vicious. She would play drums under the name Palm Olive, while Ariane became Ari Up. They were soon joined by Kate Crocus on guitar and bassist Susie Gutsy. Tess Poletz would soon replace Gutsy, and Viv Albertine would replace Crocus. They chose the name The Slits, and were written about in a tabloid before they were even played their first punk gig. In the beginning, they played a simplistic 3-chord style punk. They ended up opening for The Clash on the White Riot Tour in 1977 and Sorted Out Tour in 1978. Soon Palmolive would leave and form the Raincoats in 1978. She was replaced by Peter Clark, aka Budgie, and the band would integrate a lot of dub reggae into their sound. Their debut album, Cut, would be released in 1979. It fused dub reggae rhythms with a cleaner pop sound. The track Typical Girls was one of Kurt Cobain's favorite songs of all time. The album's cover was controversial as the girls appeared topless. Their follow-up album, Return of the Giant Slits, was even more experimental and took a lot of inspiration from African pop. On the track, Improperly Dressed, they sound like an experimental jazz cabaret band. The band ended up breaking up in 1982. Ari would play with the New Age Steppers. However, Ari and Tess Polet put together a band under the Slits names and released the EP Return of the Killer Slits in 2006 and the album Trapped Animal in 2009. The Slits had a massive impact on bands in the decades after their original formation, bands such as Bikini Kill, Sleater-Kinney, and Massive Attack. The Raincoats were formed when Portuguese-born Ana da Silva and Gina Birch saw a performance by the Slits when they were students at Hornsey College of Art in London in 1977. Their early lineup included two men, Ross Crichton and Nick Turner. Other members in the various lineups of the band included ex-Slits member Katie Crocus, Jerome Frank, Richard Dukansky before he joined Pill, and filmmaker Patrick Keeler. Eventually, the group became an all-female lineup with Da Silva on guitar, vocals and keyboards, Birch on vocals, ex-Slits member Palmolive on drums, and classically trained violinist Vicky Aspinall. The band would go on to produce 3 unique albums. Their self-titled album, released in 1979, is a mixture of post-punk, avant-garde sounds, folk, and pop melody, all put together in a primitive format. A highlight track included a very unique cover of Lola by the Kinks. Before recording the follow-up album, Odyssey Shape, drummer Palmolive left. The drum parts were played by Richard Dukansky, Charles Hayward of This Heat, and eccentric musician Robert Wyatt. The band played a variety of instruments from the Indian subcontinent and Africa on this album. They then released a live album called The Kitchen Tapes, and then followed up with the album Moving, which had more of a pop sound while still keeping the avant-garde sensibilities. The band members went their own direction after the album's release. Kurt Cobain was a huge fan of the band and wrote the liner notes along with Sonic Youth's Kim Gordon when their albums were reissued in 1992. He stated, "I really don't know anything about the Raincoats, except that they recorded some music that has affected me so much. Whenever I hear it, I'm reminded of a particular time in my life when I was, shall we say, extremely unhappy, lonely, and bored. If it weren't for the luxury of putting that scratchy copy of the Raincoats' first record, I would have had very few moments of peace. The band would reform in 1994 with Da Silva, Birch, and photographer Shirley O'Loughlin. The band had a huge influence on Riot Grrrl and indie rock artists. The Modettes were formed by ex-Slits and Raincoat member Katie Crocus, along with Ramona Carler, Jane Crockford, Melissa Ritter, and June Miles Kingston. They released one album in 1981, The Story So Far. The band had more of a poppier sound than many other post-punk bands at the time. Au Pairs were formed in 1978 in Birmingham. The members of the band included bassist Jane Monroe, vocalist-guitarist Leslie Woods, guitarist Paul Fode, and drummer Peter Hammond. Their debut album, Playing with a Different Sex, is a post-punk classic that has an off-kilter funky sound in the vein of Gang of Four. Lyrics dealt with the unfair treatment of Irish prisoners, sexuality, and gender stereotypes. Their follow-up album, Sense and Sensuality, has the band integrating soul, jazz, and disco, and unfortunately wasn't as well liked by critics. The band broke up in 1983. Young Marble Giants were formed in Wales in 1978. Brothers Phil Moxham, who played bass, Stuart Moxham, who played guitar and organ, and vocalist Alison Stratton. Rather than the aggressive three-chord punk sound, the band took inspiration from artists like Brian Eno, Can, David Bowie, Roxy Music, The Velvet Underground, Neil Young, and Kraftwerk. An early lineup included Peter Joyce, a cousin of the Moxham brothers, who had built his own synthesizer. The band would enter the studio with Dave Anderson of Hawkwind and Amon Duel 2 fame. The band had no prior experience recording so many tracks, so they were all done in one take, or most of them were anyway. With a drum machine playing in the background, the band plays sparse, minimalistic music, heightened by Stratton's melodious voice. Though it did not sell well at the time, the album did build a cult following and became influential after the band broke up in 1980. The band's music would be covered by Galaxy 500, Belle and Sebastian, and Hole. Kurt Cobain was a huge fan of the album and described their sound as relaxing, and it made his top 50 albums of all time. The band got back together in 2003 to play some gigs and festivals, with their last gig being in 2015. Ludus were formed in 1978 in Manchester. The band was led by Linder Sterling, who had designed the covers for the Buzzcocks single Orgasm Addict and the magazine album Real Life. The band would also include guitarist Arthur Codman, bassist Willie Trotter, and drummer Philip Tomazov. The band created a post-punk sound that was influenced by jazz and emphasized the artistic vocals of Linder. Cadman and Trotter left the band to be replaced by Ian Devine. The band would start integrating avant-garde sounds and French pop into their music. They would release the EPs The Visit and Pickpocket in 1980 and 1981, respectively. In 1981, they released the Seduction LP. This LP is a masterpiece that fuses avant-garde jazz improvisation with pop in an extremely unique form. The band would follow up with Danger Came Smiling in 1982. Linder enjoyed pushing the envelope and even played a concert wearing a dress made from raw meat. After living in Belgium for a while, the band broke up in 1983. The band made a massive impression on a young man they befriended who went by the name of Morrissey. He would take inspiration from Ludus's avant-garde approach, and this would influence his work in the Smiths. DELTA5 formed in Leeds in 1979 and consisted of vocalist-guitarist Jules Sale, fretless bassist Ron Allen, bassist Bethan Peters, guitarist Alan Riggs, and drummer Kelvin Knight. The double heavy bass groove, like Au Pairs, met with comparison with fellow Leeds band Gang of Four. The band put feminist issues at the forefront of their lyrics, as exemplified by their debut single, Mind Your Own Business. The band were part of the Rock Against Racism movement, and were even physically attacked by far right-wing thugs. The band released their second single, You, in 1980, and then the band released their sole album, See the World, in 1981. Some critics did not like the cleaner production of the album. As a result, the band soon broke up. Their music built a strong cult following, and they were an inspiration for the Japanese band Show and Knife, who covered You on their debut album, Mina Tanoshuku. A compilation album was released by Kill Rock Stars in 2006 of DELTA5 songs. Unfortunately, drummer Kelvin Knight died in 2015, and Jules Sales died in 2021. By clearing out the debris of traditional rock, the punk and post-punk scenes became places where female artists were more comfortable expressing their ideas. The work of these bands would pave the way for female musicians in the indie rock music scenes of the 80s, 90s, and the millennium. Tune in to the next episode, where we look at another story of tragedy and how the first wave of post-punk died out. Thank you. I'm James Wallace.